Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Craig McGuire. Last name is spelled McGuire, and he's just published a book in November 2025. If you're watching this on my three YouTube channels, which I magically got back in October, or on X, or on Rockfin, or Rumble, you'll see the title. The full title is Empire City Under Siege: 3 decades of New York FBI field office manhunts, murders, and mafia wars. It really is a significant time in American history, particularly in New York City. So many things going on. Some of the things that I don't really remember very well. And there's stories in here that I'm glad he retells or tells because I didn't know them. I remember stuff that we're going to get into, like Dog Day Afternoon or things like that. I didn't know some of the stuff, but he wrote this book with the FBI special agent. So kind of an elite agent within the FBI. His name was Anthony John Nelson. And so that's kind of his story. It's kind of a bio of him, but also kind of a historical book. This is not Craig McGuire's first book. He's also written Carmine and the 13th Avenue Boys: Surviving Brooklyn's Columbo Mob, and that achieved number 1 Amazon bestseller status in the biographies and memoirs of criminals. And it's obviously a bestseller. It has like 500 5-star reviews or 4.5-star reviews on Amazon alone. So obviously a lot of people read that. But Craig has also worn many hats. He's a successful writer, editor, designer, photographer, community reporter, and new media journalist. So he does a lot of other stuff. I know he's working on other projects, but he can talk about that. So welcome to the show, Craig McGuire.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate you having me. Big fan, and it's a privilege to be on the show and to be able to share Anthony's amazing stories.
Yeah, it really is amazing. Like he's really incredible. So like I think he actually got something in the mail from J. Edgar Hoover, and so he knew from a very early age this was kind of the path he wanted to go, starting off really early. So maybe you can just talk about your relationship with him and the genesis of this book, Empire City Under Siege.
That's a great jumping off point, Bill. So I started out cutting my teeth as a beat reporter for the Bay News in Southern Brooklyn. Gravitated to magazines, book writing. Most of the content in my books has been around has a Brooklyn theme to it. So with Carmine and the 13th Avenue Boys, I was actually introduced to Carmine Imbriali, a Columbo enforcer, through my friendship with a retired NYP detective, Tommy Dades. So after that successful collaboration, which was very interesting, collaborating with a former organized crime member, and then Tommy introduced me for another project, not related to Empire City Under Siege, and that project kind of stalled, and there was some issues there. But it was for another member of law enforcement, and Anthony was associated with just in sort of a consultative role. And this is kind of a really important theme. He was really interested in helping propel others, help others tell their stories, get well-deserved recognition. It's just been a real privilege to work with Anthony and several of the other members of law enforcement. And one of the overriding themes has really been to try to help inspire more recognition for the valuable contributions and consequences suffered by members of law enforcement to protect and serve us. And this is so starting with Anthony's career, actually in his childhood, he was born in 1949 and brought home to Red Hook. Now this is Red Hook of the along the waterfront sort of era, like rough and tumble.
Yeah, it's in the boroughs, right? It's in one of the 5 boroughs. Red Hook is, right?
Yes, it's right outside the Battery Tunnel, facing Manhattan. And this is 10 years removed from when Al Capone was a leg-breaking bouncer along the saloons of the waterfront. This is last exit to Brooklyn, type Brooklyn. So, but interestingly enough, Anthony comes from a really solid Catholic Brooklyn Italian upbringing. His mother was Italian, his father was Irish. His father was military. So early on in his childhood, they moved over to neighboring Park Slope, a little bit better, but still, this is 1950s Brooklyn stoop and stickball culture, growing up there, and then you had a lot of his friends gravitated towards. And admired the local gangsters. This was the era of Crazy Joe Gallo, taking on the Colombo family to start a war. And so these gangsters were ever present in the community, but at the same time, present was this is the era of the beat cop. You did not have the 911 911 emergency contact system, so you did not have sort of the patrol cars. You had the beat cops, and they were an authoritative presence, constantly present in the community, and Anthony admired them. There was one really compelling incident in his childhood where a friend or an acquaintance suffered an overdose, and the responding police officers who Anthony knew really made an effort to save this young man's life. Unfortunately, he died at the scene, but this stuck with Anthony. And then this was this constant theme, where he sees they're part of the fabric of the community. So a little further on in as a teenager, this was also the rise of the G-man persona. Where really it was so ever present in pop culture, in movies, increasingly in television. J. Edgar Hoover famously leaned into, sort of actually served as a consultant on several creative projects, understood the power of the media, which is pretty interesting that long ago. So there was a documentary around joining the FBI, and it inspired Anthony for his affinity to law enforcement already, but also it piqued his interest. It challenged him when they stated this is the hardest job to attain, and it sort of manifests itself later on in interesting ways. So he wrote a letter, he sent it into the FBI, and he got back a signed letter from J. Edgar Hoover. And even today, like in retrospect, he reflects that this may have been a form letter response with the stamp, but back then it made a profound impact on a young boy from Brooklyn, and he was off on his path.
Right. So he made this determination early on, and you need to, it's getting into the FBI is not a cakewalk. Like, you have to have certain requirements, fulfill certain things, pass tests, physical, academic tests. Like, it's pretty intense to get in, right?
Exactly. And it was just as it's very challenging to qualify, to meet the eligibility requirements, and then to be selected. So a low percentage of people who actually who apply are accepted and sworn in and sent to Quantico for the famed FBI Academy. So really, one of and what invariably what you'll see many of the applicants are former law enforcement, they're former military, they are CPAs, they are attorneys. The FBI is looking for like specialized skill sets in addition to standard physical and academic and educational requirements. Where Anthony distinguished himself in certain areas, aside from being a outstanding student, his upbringing, his moral integrity is evident when you meet him. But his advantage was technology. Now, when we think technology today is much more accessible. Technology is you can pick up technology skills from YouTube videos. There's so many more outlets. And then we're talking about real massive technological barriers. So Anthony always had an affinity for technology. So also to meet his, as he had to meet his age requirements, he had to meet his employment requirements. He was able to get starting in 1969 a series of administrative roles with the FBI, culminating in electronics technician. So earlier in his career, he helped facilitate the planting of listening devices on some occasions, or serving in a supportive role in some of these type of operations.
And those were key back then. A lot of these bugs or whatever, these listening devices were key elements of obtaining convictions from guys who were notoriously secretive and used codes and talked in codes and did all that stuff. So, very important part of law enforcement, certainly for the FBI. But I think he was like one of, I think like only 5% got admitted. I think you wrote in there that like
Yes.
very small proportion. So he's definitely within an elite group, right?
It's interesting you hone in on the technology aspect of the story. There are several themes when you think about the evolution of the FBI and law enforcement in general. Now, this is 500 pages of some really compelling casework. But it also follows the trajectory of this evolution. So you had the Bureau of Investigation, which was founded in the early 20th century in the Justice Department as a direct response to some of these macro trends that were dramatically impacting the fabric of America. You had these rises in immigration. You had this consolidation and this urbanization with the rise of the big cities, and then you had escalation and improvement of transportation technologies, and then you had the evolution of organized crime, which prior to prohibition was not too organized, but with prohibition you had these lucrative rackets, multi-jurisdictional rackets. You had really start to explode. And then in the aftermath of the repeal of prohibition, you had this framework for organized crime in place when you had this rise in larger cities, more of a fertile ground for organized crime to take hold and to exploit and victimize large masses of in city centers. So as this evolves over time, you have this cat and mouse, this desperate cat and mouse dynamic where organized crime is very adaptable, and it permeates through multiple jurisdictions. And then you have law enforcement, which was ill-equipped. Nowadays, you have these databases. If a crime is convicted by one criminal or organized crime group in one city, in one jurisdiction, and a similar crime, a similar MO appears, it's easier to track those with the various technologies and the coordination. That wasn't the case back then. Going from borough to borough was even challenging to pick up on these patterns. So what you needed was this centralized authority that had that could bring to bear this expertise and develop these specialized forensics capabilities, and could specialize in multi-jurisdictional like crimes. So when you look at a lot of the Anthony's trajectory, and I like his casework because it has a heavy organized crime component, but it also covers a lot of these other types of crimes where you have kidnappings, where you have hostage crises, where you have these really dramatic, rapidly evolving crimes where its time is of the essence. And that's when the FBI is at its best to be able to combat these crimes.
Yeah, one of them I didn't know about. Like he served on the Bronfman kidnapping of Samuel, the son. Very still wealthy family, but like these are things that the kidnappings, the truck hijackings, and the bank robberies don't seem to get as much attention. Maybe they're still happening, but like some of those are very vivid national stories, right?
Exactly. When you look at the kidnappings, so actually the crime had to evolve. You had the Lindbergh baby kidnapping in the middle of the 20th century, and that kind of like helped the law evolve because there really wasn't the statutes on the books to be able to bring some of these criminals to justice in the way they should be. And then you fast forward to early in Anthony's career, before he goes into Quantico, when he's still he serves in a communications role. So then you have this Bronfman incident where the 20-year-old scion of the Bronfman family is kidnapped. and he's held in like the ransom note, or the ransom communications are like he's held in an airtight box with only a 10 days of oxygen. And then if the ransom is not provided within a certain amount of time, they're also going to assassinate the Bronfman's family members with cyanide-laced bullets. So Anthony is called to respond to the scene. Now, this is Fifth Avenue penthouse in Manhattan. Anthony's in communications role, so he's responsible for fielding calls and information from ransom, and to be on site and to be able to communicate that to special agents in the field. Remember, time is of the essence. This is a very dramatic scene unfolding. And like Anthony really brings it home when he says he's on the balcony, on this Fifth Avenue balcony, and then the helicopters swoop in. Now this is 69, so the helicopters swoop in, and it's the media. So the next day, these pictures are featured and spread in the daily news. So at the same time, the family's desperate, and this is a family of means. They're willing to do anything. So they insist and they bring in Uri Geller. For listeners of a certain age, I know when I was younger, they had the ABC special with Uri Geller doing the spoon bending. And he was a famed illusionist, and so he comes in, and he actually bent a FBI, I believe, an FBI key. So that was kind of interesting that Anthony brought up. Ultimately, he was not much helpful in the investigation, other than saying that there was a bee involved here, and even though the victim was successfully rescued in Brooklyn, like that really didn't contribute much to the crisis. What eventually happened, Bill, was I believe it was in Queens, FBI special agents went and they made the drop and it was a $4.6 million ransom. Now today that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but back then that was a massive sum of money, and to date at that time it was the largest ransom requested and delivered in history. But they didn't make the arrest at the time because they had not recovered, and due to the nature of the threat, it was that the oxygen would run out before they were able to rescue him. So eventually, but with the forensic capabilities of the FBI at the time, they were able to track the vehicle and identify the perpetrators and make the rescue. And it was just an amazing story. One of the key things that come out is like early in his career, Anthony always had this sort of saying he's driven by a need to be needed. And this was not only a theme that I picked up on Anthony, but it was also across multiple members of law enforcement that I had the privilege to interview. And this was like the first successful recovery. But that's not always been the case. And as multiple members of law enforcement who are involved in these dramatic situations, it doesn't always have that positive outcome. And then throughout the time when they're investigating these crimes, when they're pursuing these criminals in the worst possible situations, there's a level of, understandable impatience. There's a level of sort of behavior that law enforcement must endure. And far too often, there's not a thank you at the end. There's not the proper level of recognition. It's just like, it's the job. Well, it's more than the job. And then a lot of the things that Anthony reflects, there are these consequences that law enforcement has to endure. And it's not just them, it's their family members, it's their friends, it's their relationships. So if anything, I just hope this book helps bring that to light more.
Yeah, there are people too. They're often overlooked. The story comes, it goes, it's a flash on media, then it's over, and then some of these actors who went through the stress and everything are overlooked. That's the importance of books like this, because it shows the tie together. He was inducted, or he became a special agent in 1976 at a fairly young age, 26 years old, and this is just the beginning. The Bronfman is the beginning. I mean, he saw so much. It's like a great history book. It's a great crime book too, but just the history of such a great city of New York City. And then like stuff I had no idea, like he was involved in what became Dog Day Afternoon. I remember watching it on TV. I had no idea that he was in that. I mean, not obviously that he was involved in that, but there was so much Like he was really in not only amongst the crime, but also the making of the film. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and one thing, just to take a step back, it's amazing working with many of these members of law enforcement. When I first engaged Anthony, we had this. And we had this breakfast at his house on a Sunday morning with his lovely wife Cindy, and then this other project was sort of falling apart. And then Anthony was like trying to help salvage it, sharing some clips about these other members of law enforcement. And then there were also the clips of many of his. I mean, these are like Jerry Capisci columns, the famed Gangland journalist. And then just like featuring these, and the more I saw this, the more I'm like, there's so much involved here, and he's questioning whether readers would find these interesting. So very early in his career, there's this dramatic hostage crisis at a bank in Gravesend, Brooklyn, which eventually became the movie Dog Day Afternoon, starring a young Al Pacino and some other like really A-list Hollywood stars. Anthony was serving in a communications capacity, helping with the other special agents on scene. It ultimately had a pretty dramatic ending when this really famous detective that Anthony was close to throughout his career was able to. They were able to secrete a weapon under the seat in the car that was to drive the hostage takers to the airport. And in a dramatic setting, like, I mean, it needed the Hollywood treatment. He was able to take the gun and shoot one of the kidnappers, and then they were able to resolve the situation. So Anthony has like a front row seat to all this dramatic unfolding, and he's the first one to mention, like, he just plays a minor role here. And then later on, he's at a friend's house I believe it's in Park Slope. Apologies if I got that wrong. But then they're filming like scenes outside, and some of his friends, not in law enforcement, some of his friends as a young man, they're there, and they're cajoling him. They're saying, "Come on, Anthony, let's go. We have a chance to be an extra on this about this hostage crisis that was and it's pretty funny. So then when you see how fiction imitates real life. And he declined, and he said, I lived it. I don't have to be an extra on the set.
Right. No, it's pretty well. And it's also in this environment of kind of like mob. It kind of reminds you of Goodfellas or something, these truck hijackings and fencing and all this sophisticated stuff. You write that it was the golden age of truck hijackings, right? So he was also involved in trying to curtail those types of thefts. Is that right?
Exactly. This was, again, now we talk about these types of crimes that really fuel organized crime, and back then hijacking, because of the technology to investigate it, because of the technology to prevent it from the automobile manufacturers was just did not exist. So it was relatively easy to tilt out a car, to take a car, to swap the VIN numbers. So in auto theft, and then in hijacking, it's just the New York tri-state area is just such a heavy multiple commerce corridors. When Anthony came out of the Quantico, interestingly enough, many agents perhaps weren't as thrilled to be assigned to the New York area, just because of the intensity and being sort of thrown into the fire there. I mean, nothing could have made Anthony happier than to come home. So here's the boy who was born in Red Hook. Among his first assignments is he's assigned as an undercover operative associated with the Gambino crime family to be the front for a warehouse in Red Hook, where he would get first right of refusal for hijacked goods when they came in. And it wasn't a particularly high volume shop, but it was still, there was some pretty dramatic busts that he was able to help contribute to, or actually, and actually the picture on the cover is from one of those busts.
Oh, wow.
And that was a pretty, now if you think about it, he's operating in undercover capacity in Red Hook, where he was born, and at the same time he's investigating crimes across multiple other areas. So throughout the early part of his career, because he's this Brooklyn persona is so ingrained, because of he has this inherent strength and authoritative. He has like this Italian look about him from his heritage, but also he can kind of carry a conversation in Italian from his upbringing. But he insisted to make sure that I didn't pass him off as being fully fluent in Italian. Getting the facts right were very important to Anthony. So if anything's wrong, guys, it's my fault.
Gotcha.
So then he's because of this persona, he's involved in many different undercover operations, to the point on several instances he's sets up or he's part of investigations that set up these drug buys in Fort Lauderdale, in Miami. This is the era of the cocaine cowboys. So he's posing as an organized crime operative traveling to Florida to do multi-kilo cocaine buys in like these seedy hotel rooms. And these are the kind of stories that Anthony's sharing with me. And he's asking me, do you think readers would like this? And I'm just his undercover work alone could have been a book. But then when you look at the breadth of work, it's interesting. The FBI covers so many different areas. Like law enforcement will call the FBI in when there's a hostage crisis, because they know they could bring to bear the level of resources. But also, crimes conducted on federal lands and facilities. That's, you have Fort Hamilton that's right there, a massive facility, and Fort Wadsworth just across the Narrows. You have the airports. Large FBI offices have these things that I learned called RA, resident agencies. So it's like a field office within a field office. So there was a large Brooklyn, Queens one that Anthony was assigned to, and he ran several squads out of when he was promoted to supervisory special agent. So you had like many instances where you have, and I was surprised by this. I didn't know like how many times the FBI has to be called to JFK, to LaGuardia to intercede. There's a really great art. I believe Jerry Capisci wrote it about an incident where an unruly passenger tried to set fire to a stewardess's hair. And then you had other incidents where, they're just drunken passengers just beating up on these poor airline crews. And then Anthony and so like a round robin fashion, members in that office, including Anthony on several ones, they have to rush to the airport. And so that's some of the like the non-glamorous work, but it's really compelling. And then some of these crimes conducted at the VA hospital, where you have like Jason Randazzo, who was on Anthony's squad, and Anthony reflecting, like you have these really, unfortunately, these really damaged former service members who put it on the line for this country, and they come home with PTSD, and they get involved or in these hostage crises, these domestic violence incidences, and then the FBI has to respond to those and deal with this. You also have the VA hospitals. It's this sprawling network of facilities throughout the country, and especially consolidated in major cities, where some pretty tragic crimes over there that are happening, and some murders that Anthony has to respond to and investigate. So it's some pretty compelling stories.
Never boring. Like he wore so many different hats. You also mentioned a guy by the name of Kenny McCabe. Like it's kind of like his one of his cohorts in the FBI, who you say you think they should tell his story too. Like these guys have had incredible careers, right? The multi-decade careers.
Yeah, Bill, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is really central. One of the things, and I'll tell you that like one of the working titles for this book was In the Company of Courage. And if it was Anthony's decision, we would have named it In the Company of Courage. That captures the spirit of this book. And so we try to do that. So you'll see there are little vignettes. Like when we cover the case history, I try to add a little bit more biographical information about some of these heroes of law enforcement. And none stands taller than Kenny McCabe. Kenny McCabe had spent several decades as a leading organized crime detective and investigator for the New York City Police Department, and then as well as for the United States Attorney General's office. So there was this great incident. It was a hijacking. It had to do with a confidential informant gave a tip to Anthony, and incidentally, this is one of the earliest references to Roy DeMeo in that conversation. Who at the time Anthony didn't understand the gravity of what that name would come to mean to the underworld. But at the time, so he gets a tip off of this hijacking, heads to the scene. And then he also so not just looking to recover the goods, because recovering the goods doesn't really unfoil the conspiracy. So waiting to see like who's going to show up. Then he also notices this other familiar face that he's seen floating around there. So then later he goes to the NYPD, and famous detective Nevins, I believe is the name. He asks him about it, and he says, "Oh, that's Kenny McCabe," and Kenny happened to be there. So this is the first time they meet. They decide, you know what, let's go check it out, and they're able to, make the collar. But what develops is this amazing relationship, and this is it. It would really be it's really a gross understatement to say, Kenny McCabe is like the most consequential weapon in law enforcement's arsenal in the latter half of the 20th century to dismantle organized crime. I just really want to call out his son, Kenny McCabe, Duke McCabe, Kenny McCabe Jr., Duke McCabe. So for the last 20 years, he's been consolidating all the legacy of his father, and he's I really do can't wait until he produces that, because if anyone deserved sort of the Hollywood treatment, it's Kenny McCabe. But Kenny McCabe was his focus was on the job, and his focus was on his family. So he really was not involved in any of this. Like, remember, Bill, this was the age of the rise of like the perp walk, and the rise of, you had really the press release, the law enforcement press release or press conference. Kenny was not involved in any of this. So there's very little, if any, actual material. So it's really hard to develop a media, any kind of media project without any media. So you can't, like, B-roll is not going to cut it for an hour. And so a lot of that's why Duke has been doing like a heroic effort to pull all this together. And I wish him nothing but the best. So getting back to the 1970s, you have Anthony's provisioned with Plymouth Grand Fury with the full police interceptor kit. So if you're familiar with those kind of vehicles from that era, this screams Copmobile.
Right.
So you have
Pistons, huge engine.
You have this member of the FBI, and then you have this member of the police department. They decide, and they start what turns out to be a couple of decades of going out on these night rides at a time when the New York is blanketed with all these hundreds of these organized crime hotspots, these social clubs, these cafes. And Kenny McCabe was known as like the encyclopedia of, before the databases, before technology, the encyclopedia of organized crime. And we have some really compelling, like, law enforcement member after law enforcement member has stories about how Kenny was brought in to testify, and he could call out their criminal specialization, who they were aligned with, what crimes they're suspected of, who their wives and girlfriends were, just the whole litany of it in very compelling and believable ways. Now think about it like this. So you have this and they wanted to be conspicuous to the fact where they park in front of social clubs, they park in the bus stop, they make sure they were obvious, and very early on, they would just like, it's kind of if nothing more than a nuisance, to the point where there's this pretty dramatic story where you had none other than Gambino boss Paul Castellano walk up to the car and say, "Hey guys, if you want to see me, just come to my table at Ponte Vecchio, and then we'll have a talk." But quickly after that, Castellano sent down an edict that absolutely no one is to engage with these two or for anything like this. So it's it's just story after story. This amazing partnership that unfolds.
These are very tough people. These are killers. These guys are really rough. It's very rough company. You got to be very courageous, like you said, to actually do some of this stuff. I mean, and some of that criminality thing. I mean, I didn't know so much about they're involved in like the beginning of the porn industry and just behind so many different criminal enterprises were all over the place, loan sharking and fraud, and just like these guys had to be on their toes to follow all of these guys and their murders, and they're deliberately leaving bodies out to intimidate people and things like that. It's really something else.
I'm glad you brought that up, because there's another important theme, and it's really epitomized by this relationship between the FBI agent and the detective. It's this misperception that there was no collaboration. There are well documented incidents where there was certain intra-agency conflict and credit grabbing, but what's really not told more is so much of the collaboration. This is the era and the rise of the task forces, where you would get 6 members of the New York City Police Department, 6 members of the FBI, and then would be assigned to a task force to focus on a particular area of crime, a particular family. So this is really what was happening, and it's interesting what you mentioned. Now you also had, this is the era when RICO was on the rise, but it really took some time for prosecutors to really figure out how to leverage it. But really, none of this is because organized crime upper echelon was insulated from all this by layers of hierarchy. It was really challenging to bring them to bear without being able to establish all these conspiracies. And the only way you get that, Bill, is from thousands of hours of really hard wearing out that shoe leather, like one of the sources in the book would say. And then it's that the use of the FBI's effective use of confidential informants and its well resources, and then local law enforcement's like intimate, and close proximity to the streets. But then you also had the cooperation of the DEA, the Secret Service, Customs. And so you just had these it created this model for collaboration, and most famously is the Walter Mack task force and its ability to bring some pretty dramatic cases, including ultimately the DeMeo taking down the DeMeo crew, even after Roy DeMeo was assassinated by members of his own crew.
Wow. Yeah, and that's what Paul asked for people listening to the audio. He says, how did the FBI work with the New York PD? And you said that McCabe came out of the NYPD. And then was there animosity about who got credit for solving the cases? Do you know if there was competition about credit?
See, this is like where a lot of the misperceptions are. And Anthony calls this out very eloquently. Like, you look at any walk of life, you look at any enterprise, there's always going to be conflict. And then when you add on the stakes that they're facing, it just amps up the level of drama. So yes, there were many instances of credit grabbing and resentment, but that's just part of the story. And it neglects this tapestry of connections and connective tissue that was established. How you had, and it's funny because it escapes my name, but one of the members of law enforcement, it may have been George Terra, who mentioned it. So you had, FBI tends to be better educated just because they have higher. It's not that they're more intelligent; it's higher eligibility requirements than you do have for NYPD. So you kind of have like two different prototypes, but you put them into, and he said you put them into a room inside of a week. You take 6 from the FBI, 6 from NYPD, you put them in a room. Within a week, you can't really discern who's from which agency. And it's just like sort of vignettes like that really And Anthony is well regarded by many members of law enforcement for his ability to share intelligence. Remember, with his network of confidential informants, he's the first to say that I didn't make many of these arrests. I wasn't interrogating them, but through this cooperation, through all this use of intelligence, we're able to establish like all these predicate crimes, establish all these conspiracies. It's just a pretty remarkable story there.
It really is. I mean, and the other thing, like I have a listener who's listening from South Africa right now, Norman, who's interested in Anthony's connection to 9/11. So he's literally there in New York City when that catastrophic event happened, right?
Yes, actually he's in. He lives in Brooklyn, and he responds and he's managing a command post in Brooklyn. And then he's also, remember, and this is the time when they're just getting inundated with tips, and they have to work through all these tips. Where you had some of these, like some folks in the community shared the same names or surnames with some of the hijackers, and they have to go and they have to go through all these. There's a really compelling story in the book about Al King, a really famous detective who and Anthony had a really strong relationship. And I believe Al King, he shares how, at the end of the day, he would go home and take his boots off. And then in the morning when he came and he'd make sure to leave his boots outside. And then in the morning when he came out, like his boots was just crawling with maggots from all the biological material. It's those kind of details, that he's sharing. And then Jason Randazzo, I believe, sharing how, investigating and following up on all these tips and these poor people who are wrongly, accused on these false tips. It was crazy. And then you think about, how these men and women were away from their families for weeks and months at a time. It's just such heroism. It's just
And you've got all the pics in here. You got pics in the back, so you can see what Anthony Nelson looked like and all that stuff. 500 pages of research. It's an amazing book. Like as far as like the depth that you've been to, like really categorize his life is pretty incredible. So kudos to you. We're at the 45-minute mark. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap it up? I highly recommend people check out this book. It's really great. I mean, I feel like we've only scratched the surface, actually.
Bill, I just want to reiterate what a privilege it was, and I will tell you, my father was military, my uncle come from military background, and I was always, taught and trained like, you see a military man, shake his hand. And thank you for his service. But now, when I see a member of law enforcement, that's what I do. It opened my eyes to the level of commitment and sacrifice that they do every day. I hope more of that gets out there. I hope society becomes more forgiving and understands the challenges. And Anthony's, the first to admit, like, we don't get it right, but they live with these life and death consequences, like in the heat of the moment. They're not perfect, but they're really trying, and they're doing it on our behalf. And shame on us if we don't recognize that.
Agreed. It's a human story. Like you hear about all these mobs and they're glorified, but these guys, the law enforcement guys, need their own appreciation too for the sacrifices. It can't be easy to do these jobs. You work strange off hours, very stressful. These are dangerous people. Like they'll there's law enforcement. You tell stories in this book, people who didn't make it, people who were shot. So there's a lot of risk there as well. So kudos to Anthony John Nelson. He's got to be in his 70s now. And
Yes,
kudos to you. I mean, also this book is out. It's on Amazon now. People can get the Kindle, the hardcover, the paperback. They can also check out your other older book, the one we mentioned earlier, which is Carmine and the 13th Avenue Boys, Surviving Brooklyn's Colombo Mob. For people who want to reach out to you, Craig, is there a good spot? Or you said Wild Blue Press, right? Isn't that where you
Yes,
direct
there's
people?
something, Bill. There's something special going on at Wild Blue Press. I write for partly for myself, kind of selfishly. I'm a true crime fan from very early on, and true crime just really specializes in this category. So supportive of writers. I really appreciate being able to get these stories out there. So truecrimepress.com. We have a lot of exciting things going on social media, a lot of interesting things coming up. And Bill, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for having me
Yeah,
on the show.
and you mentioned thanks to a lot of the guys that I interact with all the time at Wild Blue Press. So I see their names in my emails all the time. But Craig, great job. Thanks for your time. Congrats on the book. Again, the full title of the book is Empire City Under Siege: 3 Decades of New York FBI Field Office Manhunts, Murders, and Mafia Wars. Like I said, we've probably covered 10% of the book. There's so much more left in there. So please go check it out. And again, the author is Craig McGuire, McGuire. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.